serious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. I know I say it every single week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. And while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a review, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It really, really does help us out, and you're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going not too bad at all, Mark. Good to be back here. Feels almost like we've gone back to reality, back to normality now that I can come round here every week.
It's a little bit of normality, Lewis, in an otherwise chaotic world. And you've got yourself a haircut. God. I have not. Yeah. I'm so sad about this fact.
One of us is looking better than the other right now.
Yep. Good lord.
Yeah,
it's so bad.
It's a nice little touch of normality after, what was that, 4 months of just the most hideous, long, dreadful hair. I can't recommend it enough, Mark. Get a haircut.
I'm definitely going to get a haircut, man. But Lewis, video games. What have you been playing? In fact, I know what you've been playing. We've both been playing Ghost of Tsushima.
We have both been playing Ghost of Tsushima, although I suspect you considerably more than I have. I've only played about the first hour or so, like more or less the tutorial section, partly just because I've not had a lot of time this week, but I think also, a bit like what you were saying last week, I felt a little bit that I just need a break right now, like just a few days of...
It happens, man.
Yeah, and I think I just need to not jump from one huge endeavour like The Last of Us Part 2 was straight into this, which is another, a big open world exploration heavy game. I did think quite a bit about either starting Bastion, our play along game, which I haven't started yet.
I've actually finished Bastion before we even started this.
Good stuff. Or going back and finishing XCOM Chimera Squad, which I've still only got a little bit to do. Because that's so granular and small, like bite-sized playable sections kind of thing, I thought that would be good, but honestly I've just kind of spent my nights like looking at Twitter and not doing very much. I think I just need that downtime. So
fair enough, man, definitely. Yeah. I'd also say as well, like if you feel that just playing that smaller title, even just finishing Chimera Squad allows you to jump head first into Ghost of Tsushima at a later date, then that's definitely the right choice. You don't want to be feeling as if you're slogging through the game,
That's totally it, because I'm so looking forward to it, and the bit of it I've played, which we'll come on in a wee second, I was really enjoying, but I don't want to spoil the experience by trying to rush it or playing
forcing yourself
into
it,
playing it thinking like I'm just doing this so that I can say more about it on the podcast kind of thing. So I'm quite glad to have not pushed myself too hard. I think this weekend I've got a huge bit of clear time in front of me. Like on Saturday I think I'm just going to play it for hours. Yeah,
cool, man.
It's going to be great.
So what did you think of the opening tutorial / introduction to the world / story? It was a great tutorial. It was one of the best tutorials I've seen in a long time in a game.
It just dives straight in with the story beats that if you've watched any of the marketing materials you kind of know it's just about the invasion. There's nothing particularly spoilery there, but yeah, I thought it was really good fun. The combat that it just kind of drops you right into, it doesn't really teach you how any of it works to begin with.
Just go.
Yeah,
attack.
You're just exactly that. It's just like attack these people and work out what you're doing. Like that was quite exciting just to get to grips with it yourself before it starts saying like press these buttons to do these things. So far, as I say, very early on, but the combat system I'm really liking. It feels I was quite worried that it was going to just feel exactly like the Arkham games or slightly older Assassin's Creed games, that kind of like spam square and just get through a fight, and it's just not that at all. You
cannot spam square. You absolutely cannot spam square. I've got to say, the combat system, I'm really, really enjoying it. I've now unlocked a second stance as well.
Nice.
So I'm about, I don't know, I'd say about 8 hours in. Like, I'm not massively far into the game either, I have to admit. And doing that just changes things quite a bit. And looking at all the upgrades and things like that, and you won't have seen any of this stuff yet. Looking at all the upgrades and all the RPG elements and all the trees that you can follow and all the things that you can unlock, really it properly allows you to play the game the way you want to play it. Like if you do want to play it stealthily like the Ghost, you 100% can do that, and you can just pile all your upgrades into that section of the skill tree. Or you can play like 100% total honourable straight-laced samurai. It will be more difficult, but you can definitely play it that way. And like you said, the combat, it definitely takes some skill. Do you know what I mean? It definitely takes some skill. You can't just go in and start bashing square or trying to dodge roll at the wrong times or trying to block or trying to perfect parry at the wrong times and whatever. Because if you do that, the game will absolutely punish you. It is quite punishing if you get it wrong. It's not quite in the Dark Souls realm, but if you fuck up a good few times, you will die.
Yeah, I mean, certainly your health bar at the start is nothing much at all. And I really like that thing of like by attacking enemies, you replenish your ability to to regenerate your health. Like, and
so it's called Resolve.
Yeah.
And that is basically what you use to heal yourself, is just Resolve is just basically you getting a bit more get up and go, which I quite like.
I'm not going to die to you.
Exactly. Which is very samurai. I like it. I have to say as well, this might be the most beautiful open world I have ever seen. Yeah. It is stunning. Now, I thought The Last of Us Part 2 looked incredible, and it did look incredible. However, it was a very bleak environment that you were in.
Totally.
This looks incredible, and it's stunningly beautiful. It's very serene and quite mystical, I would say. It really is something quite special indeed. If you've not seen screenshots from the incredible photo mode as well, it has one of the best photo modes in any game ever. It really is something to behold. It really is very striking to look at almost all times.
Yeah, I've probably spent more time in that photo mode already than in most games that I've played. Like, you can even set up your own little animations in it where you can kind of move the camera in a certain way. I thought it was great fun. I played about with that for a good half an hour or more, just like seeing what was going on. I also used the Kurosawa mode, which is
the black and white
filter. Yeah, used it briefly, felt it was a little bit distracting, so I might not lean on that the way that I thought I might have done. And I'm playing in Japanese with English subtitles.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
But again,
I think a lot of people are taking that option, man.
Like, I think it's probably better. The one thing is that the facial animations are synced to the English dialogue, not the Japanese. So
it looks dubbed.
It looks dubbed.
Oh, that's weird.
And also, because
it's usually the other way around.
You're often trying to read dialogue while there's quite a lot of action happening on screen.
This is in general why I don't particularly like subtitles, I have to admit. So I'm playing it in normal English mode, we will say. But really fantastic so far. Like, I'm really responding quite positively to it. I have to admit, it's given me a lot of faith in open world games again.
Yeah, good.
However, the size of it is still quite daunting, and I know that it's not even that big by open world game standards. I think of the first sort of area I was saying to you just before we started recording, I've maybe covered about a third of that map in slightly under 10 hours, and I was just thinking, oh god, the rest of this is going to be so long. It's going to be so long. But I am taking my time. I'm going and doing a lot of the side quests. I'm going and doing a lot of the side content. I'm not by any means rushing through this, and I won't rush through it either, so I'll probably have quite a long playtime on this, I would have thought. But initial impressions, and they are only initial impressions at this point. Combat, absolutely great. Looks stunning. Story, very, very interesting. I like as well that it has had an incredibly positive response from Japanese gamers as well, and Japanese reviewers and things like that. And the fact that it has went down this kind of Kurosawa route of very, very cinematic.
Cinematic, yeah.
And that was a very, very intentional choice. But so far, definitely enjoying it and responding very positively to it so far.
Can't wait to get a bit further in then. Really excited for it.
Absolutely, man. All right, Lewis, I think it's time for the news. All right, news item number 1. There was a Nintendo Direct Mini this week, Lewis, and mini it was indeed. So, Nintendo announced on Twitter that they were going to do this Direct Mini. They said that they were going to be focusing on third-party partners, and they would be sharing a few updates on a small group of previously announced Nintendo Switch games, quotes. Despite this, the internet seemed to think that we were getting everything from Breath of the Wild 2 to new 3D Marios to Metroid Prime 4. So, the expectations for this were absolutely wild. However, it was, as I said, mini indeed. It was only a little over 8 minutes long, and the announcements were DLC for Cadence of Hyrule, Rogue Company from Hi-Rez, which is a sort of tactical third-person shooter with battle royale elements, which is coming to early access. It's out on PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and is coming to the Epic Games Store as well, and it's going to be cross-play and cross-progression between all those platforms as well. The next announcement after that was the WWE 2K Battlegrounds, which we got to see a little bit more gameplay from, and oof.
Yeah, were you asking for more gameplay, Mark?
I really wasn't, but to be honest with you, I'm glad I've seen it, because now that just confirms what I thought, and that it's not good.
Yeah, it wasn't just
really does not.
It wasn't just a bad reveal trailer. It looks like a bad video game.
Good heavens, it really does, unfortunately. But that is coming on September the 18th. If you are interested in it, and pre-orders are open now, then we kind of get into the main announcements from this, which is that Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster is coming to Switch in spring 2021, and then they announced as well that the latest game in the Shin Megami Tensei series, Shin Megami Tensei 5, will be released in 2021 as well. Now, I am personally quite interested in the Shin Megami Tensei series. I like JRPGs. It's one of these JRPGs that I know is huge in Japan, and I know for a fact that this 8-minute Nintendo Direct would have went down a hell of a lot better in Japan than it did in the West. And while I am personally quite interested in these games, I understand that almost no one else in the West does. And subsequently, there was a hostile reaction, we will say, to the Nintendo Direct Mini. What were your thoughts?
Not hostile, to be honest. I mean, I didn't think it was particularly good. There was
I don't think anyone thought it was particularly good. Again, I'm interested in these games, and I didn't think it was particularly good.
There was no announcement here that particularly interested me at all. Like, as you said, glad to have seen a bit more of Battlegrounds just so that we can confirm that it's absolutely no good. Rogue.
We don't know that for certain yet.
No, I think we do.
Okay.
I think it's like there's just so many different directions I think you could take that type of game in, which is a conversation for another time. And Rogue Company wasn't doing anything for me at all either. Although, like, the cinematic trailers that we've seen for it now, it was quite well done. But
it's quite a cool game. It's not for me.
No.
I think that a lot of people were responding more positively to that than most other things in the direct after.
Exactly that. But in terms of Shin Megami Tensei 3 and 5, I suppose, I basically don't know anything about that series.
This was the series, for those that don't know, that the Persona series spun off from.
Right.
The Persona series is a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series.
Yeah, I thought the trailers and stuff were, well, the trailer that we got for 3 at least was really cool. But it totally goes over my head. It's not something that I'll play. It's not something that I'm particularly interested in. But like you said, the fact that it has a big following there, the fact that there will be JRPG fans in the West for whom this will be a cool, interesting, possibly quite big announcement for some people.
Yeah, definitely. So it's my jumping on point.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
exactly,
I've not played any of these games before. It's been something that I've been wanting to play for a very, very long time, and this is a great, great opportunity for me personally to get involved in that series. And it probably is a great opportunity for a lot of people to get involved in that series if you are into JRPGs. I just don't think that this is what a lot of people were looking for, unfortunately. But I think that a lot of times that was sort of their fault, because they did say, I mean, Nintendo couldn't have been clearer about this. It was going to be mini. It was going to be a few games, and it was going to be about things that we already knew about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And they also announced it was going to be last
be
minute as well. Like, that tells you that it's not a big hype moment.
And it was going to be third party. So Breath of the Wild 2, anything from Mario, none of that was going to happen. Absolutely none of that was going to happen. So I think that expectations really, really, really had to be managed here. However, what I want to talk about more than this direct specifically is Nintendo feel, outside of Animal Crossing, because Animal Crossing was an absolute colossus when it came out, apart from that, it feels like a very, very slow year from Nintendo. And there have been other games released, Paper Mario very recently, the Xenoblade Chronicles remake as well, came out and was received very positively by fans. But I think it feels like a very, very slow year because Nintendo just haven't told us about anything that's happening later in the year or anything that's happening next year. Like, we just don't know. So I think a lot of people are clamoring for Nintendo news and therefore put massive expectations on something like that. And when it's not fulfilled, then they get angry.
Well, that's just how the internet behaves, isn't it? You're totally right there, Mark. That, to me, the key here isn't necessarily that it is a slow year, because as you said, like, Animal Crossing was absolutely a colossus at that moment, and for quite a while after. I think that's tapered a wee bit now. Paper Mario has done fine. It's selling well.
Yeah, reviewed relatively well.
Reviewed well. Xenoblade Chronicles, like, that's doing something for fans. Like, fair enough. But it's the absence of information. It's the fact that there's an entire 6 months effectively of this year that we don't know anything about. And even Paper Mario was announced pretty late. So if you step this conversation back about a month, we didn't even really know about that either.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's a problem there. The point that I keep coming back to, though, is that if they came out in 6 weeks' time and announced the slate of Mario remasters that we're kind of expecting, or some Metroid information, or any of those games, suddenly it's not such a bad year anymore.
Well, I don't know, man. Like, so last year, Pokemon came out, obviously that was gigantic. Luigi's Mansion 3, Link's Awakening, Fire Emblem, Super Mario Maker, and then there was a lot of third parties on the system as well. So the CTR remake, the Spyro Trilogy remake, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, Baba Is You, Untitled Goose Game, Astral Chain, like, all of those were very Switch associated games, whereas it just doesn't feel as if there's any of that this year, you know? Even if they do announce those games, they would need to be coming out this year, do you know what I mean, for them to have an impact.
Yeah.
But even if they're not going to be coming out this year and they don't want to get into a race with the upcoming new generation of consoles towards the end of the year, which, I mean, fair enough, as a business decision, that might not be the best thing. But just something, man, just anything, just give us some information, do you know what I mean? That, I think, is what fans want more than anything. It doesn't have to be a Breath of the Wild 2 announcement, it doesn't even have to be the 3D Mario announcement, it just has to be something, it just has to be more information. We just want to know what's going on, you know?
Totally agree with that. Like, being silent is never a good strategy, and if that is because they don't have anything much to say, and you have to assume that that's part of it, because why wouldn't they have said something yet? They would have been expected to make a proper announcement in June had a normal E3 gone ahead. And so,
well, that's the thing, that's the thing that I feel like we're missing,
totally,
right?
Yeah. But it's also that if they are feeling like being forced to do that in June, and it might have been rubbish because they didn't really have anything ready to show yet, then we would all be piling onto them for announcing a bunch of games that look terrible or don't look ready or aren't going to come out this year or whatever. So I feel like Nintendo are in a bit of a perfect storm this year because obviously COVID has affected everything. I don't know why they aren't just making more of that. But like you said, I think that's a really key point, that they have got in the back of their minds constantly, what are Xbox and PlayStation doing and how do we fit in around that? But like there are there was 3 2K games or a whole series of 2K games in BioShock, Borderlands and XCOM that came to Switch recently.
You're not wrong in that.
But you're right that it doesn't feel like much is going on.
That's because that's not super associated with Switch. Do you know what I mean? And it's good that those games are there, certainly, but it's not something it's not like a absolutely belting indie, you know what I mean? Which it gets immediately associated with Switch.
That's the key. It's those big indies that matter, and they haven't been here this year.
Alright, well, news item number 2. More announcements, Lewis. The day of the devs presentation happened as part of Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest, and this works to promote indie games and was hosted by Double Fine and I Am 8-Bit. So before the actual day of the devs presentation happened, Jeff Keighley had a couple of announcements to make beforehand that involved quite a lot of Muppets. More Muppets than I was comfortable with, quite frankly. However, the big announcement basically was that Overcooked All-You-Can-Eat edition was going to be announced, and this was a compilation of Overcooked 1 and Overcooked 2 coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series X, which included a full remaster of Overcooked 1 and in glorious 4K 60 FPS, which is insane for a little game like that. And I thought that is fucking awesome because Overcooked is amazing. Me and you played it together, and it was one of the best couch co-ops I've ever played in my life. And I was so hesitant to play it. I remember being like, everyone says this is great, but I don't really like the look of this. It's not going to be that good, blah, blah, blah. Playing it for maybe about 30 seconds, and I thought, oh, it's got me. This is the greatest thing in the world.
So addictive, so much fun, yeah. And it's really cool that they're doing the full remaster.
Really, really excellent indeed. We also got a performance of the Bugsnax song, and I said at the time where we saw Bugsnax for the first time in the PlayStation 5 reveal event that it looked like a fever dream, and that song fit right in with that, I feel. So they've nailed it in that capacity, I will say. But on to the day of the devs, Lewis, on to the day of the devs. They started off with Ghost Runner, this from a Polish studio called One More Level, and it basically looks like 3D Katana Zero.
Exactly,
right?
It's exactly like that, yeah. It's all about quick movements, dying a lot, working out the best pathway through a level. It's first person, running about on walls, slashing people with samurai swords, using time manipulation powers. It looks like a lot of fun.
It does look a lot of fun. It looks well put together as well. Like,
definitely,
it looks sharp.
Yeah, first person katana is a bit strange, I think, but once you're used to that, I think it will be great.
Next up was Tunche, this by Peruvian studio Leap Games. This was like a side-scrolling beat-em-up, similar to sort of Streets of Rage or things of that nature. However, everything in this game was hand animated, and for that it looked very, very impressive. I've got to admit, side-scrolling beat-em-ups aren't massively my thing, although me and Lewis have actually started playing Streets of Rage 4 recently. This one wasn't doing a lot for me, but in terms of art style and in terms of the amount of work that they put in, and in terms of the slickness of the hand-drawn animations, I thought it looked fantastic. Absolutely, so if you are into that, definitely go and check it out. Next up was Find Me, this from the Girls Make Games project, which is a project to get young women and girls into game development. And this was one of the winners of their project one year, because I think it kind of works on a yearly basis, and this was one of the winners. And it was heavily Limbo inspired, which is immediately awesome. 2D platformer, obviously had puzzle elements as well. Looked quite cool. Wasn't doing a whole lot for me, I've got to admit, but I just like projects like that, do you know what I mean, that are getting like women into games, considering diversity in the video games industry is absolutely garbage.
And it's come from young women who have dreamt up an idea and had it turned into a game by professionals.
Yeah, like teenagers as well.
Yeah,
this
exactly,
is like properly young girls that have come up with this idea. Yeah, it's really cool, really great project. Next up was an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, and yes, that is indeed the title of the game. This from Strange Scaffold, which sounds precisely as daft as the name, I've got to say, where every NPC in this game is a stock image of a dog, Lewis. I don't really know what this game is.
No, it's hard to tell, really, isn't it?
I don't have too much to say about it. It is truly bizarre, in a nice way, in a very, very lovely way, but it was wild. I didn't really know what was happening. After that was a game called Unto the End, this by 2 Ton Studios, which is a husband and wife team from Canada. This, for me, honestly, was one of the highlights of the show. I thought this looked absolutely superb. It's a side-scrolling combat game where the combat looks actually very, very dynamic for being a 2D side-scroller. And it was all about trying to create opportunities and responding to what the enemy was doing. And dare I say, look a bit Dark Souls, again, eye roll emoji. But it did look very, very good. And in a similar way that we were just talking about the combat in Ghost of Tsushima, they were keen to point out that you couldn't just go in there and button bash. Like, you had to be strategic about what you were doing in all encounters. I think that's a really cool way to go go about, and it had a really, really nice art style, kind of quite Nordic looking, or maybe Canadian looking, but really, really caught my eye, definitely. Next up was Shredded Secrets. This was also by Girls Make Games. This one was more a narrative-based platformer, basically about bullying in high school and kind of tackling issues around that. And it was based on the experiences of the young girls that made the game, which was pretty cool. I mean, I must admit, it's probably one of these things that's going to be very narrative heavy, but the game looked quite crisp. The game looked quite tight and quite smart. So I don't know if it was them specifically that was doing the development on it, but whoever was doing the development on it did a great job on that. Next up was Mondon. This by a one-person studio called Hidden Fields, which was literally a dude who's been working on this game for 6 years, unbelievably. And it is a very creepy looking first person horror which has an amazing sketch like art style to it.
All hand drawn.
Really, really interesting art style. Really interesting.
I mean, you can tell why he's been working on it for so long when you see this. It looks basically all like hand drawn, but like pencil drawings, like all kind of graphic pencil drawings. Incredible. Like the gameplay itself looked a little bit ropey to me, a little bit previous gen maybe, but the art style alone and the atmosphere of it and the stuff that it was showing off was really cool looking.
Again, it's going to be something that I think is going to rely heavily on narrative and not very heavily on gameplay action itself, specifically. So I'm definitely interested in that. Definitely want to keep your eye on. Next up after that was Grief Helm. This by developer John Dale Lonack. This was quite unfortunate that this game came after Unto the End because it is in a lot of ways very, very similar. It's a combat-focused 2D platformer game where you play as knights, but this one does have online elements and local multiplayer options as well. Look much more arcadey and a lot less story-driven.
Yeah, like almost like a more of a fighting game than a narrative game, essentially.
Yeah. I would say that's about right. Not that it looked bad at all. I just think that it was unfortunate that it came after a game which I thought looked quite a lot better and was quite similar.
Pretty similar art style. Yeah, I thought it looked good fun, particularly the co-op stuff. I think is quite cool for an indie game to have.
We'll see. Want to keep your eye on, definitely. Next up after that was I Am Dead. This by Hollow Ponds and Richard Hogg. This one we've seen before. I can't remember where we've seen it before. I'm sure it was in some other indie collection at some point. And this is the game where you play as a ghost and you can look through objects in a sort of cross-sectional manner. And there's kind of puzzles built into the game around that. Very vibrant, very colourful world as well that's created. I think that it looks okay, to be honest with you, but I know that you seem to be really, really interested in it, man.
I just think it's a really cool idea. So
it's a very cool idea. It's a very cool idea.
It looks like essentially a puzzle game, but told through your wanderings through this kind of strange island community, looking into people's memories in order to discover the objects which relate to your dead friends. So essentially, I think so you can conjure them, and it's all about stopping a volcano going off. It just looks like it's got a really fun, kind of fresh approach to comedic storytelling in games, and it's right up my street. I think I'm quite looking forward to it.
Cool, man. Definitely want to keep your eye on as well. Next up after that was Figment Creed Valley. This is by Bedtime Games and is actually DLC or potentially a sequel. I think DLC for the first game in the series, which was called Figment, which is a game that I must admit I'm not very familiar with. But this game is set within the human mind and is a musical as well.
Yeah, folk musical. Yeah.
There was a lot of kind of weird things going on with this. I have to admit it wasn't doing a lot for me, but it was an interesting concept and I very much enjoy that about indie games. Next up after that was Alba, a wildlife adventure. This by Us2 Games. Now, you might not have heard of Us2 Games, but you've probably heard of some of the games that they have made, namely Monument Valley and Assemble with Care, which was one of the top Apple Arcade games when it first came out. So really, really good studio. There wasn't really much of an announcement here apart from that the game existed, basically. However, anything from that studio is definitely worth keeping your eye on, I would say. After that was Void Train by Niarga. This was described as an action-packed survival shooter where you ride an interdimensional train, and there's also some RPG and crafting elements built into that, which sees you travel between worlds effectively, which are very different from one another, and you can kind of get off your train and explore within this world, and then there's also fighting happening on the train as well. This all sounds a bit mad, and I would say that the shooting in this game didn't look brilliant. It looked like very indie game shooting, but as I said to you, I think that this game is maybe 50 grand away from being something really quite interesting. Like, I really think that they are onto something quite interesting indeed with that game, but I think unfortunately the indie budget might be letting them down. But a really interesting concept, definitely something I'll be keeping my eye on anyway. Next up after that was Mechanus, this by Huey Games from Manchester here in the UK. This is a 2D side-scrolling puzzle game which sees you play as a little gear man, which sounds daft, but actually it had like this really cool steampunk art style to it. Really did, and I thought that it looked really, really interesting indeed. Again, maybe apart from Unto the End, that was probably one of the ones that caught my eye the most.
Nice.
After that was Mask Maker, this by Interspace VR. Obviously, this means that this is a VR game, which, again, I was saying to you, I think that this is a niche in a niche. Do you know what I mean? Indie games are niche within themselves, and VR games are a niche within that again. So you're really cornering your market a little bit by making an indie VR game. That being said, it looked cool in terms of art style. The trailer didn't really give away a lot of what the game is, apart from you seem to be putting on different masks, and that seems to be taking you different VR worlds. Maybe something interesting to keep your eye on if you do have a VR headset. After that was Dreamscaper, this by Afterburn Studios. This was a isometric action RPG/roguelike. The gameplay seemed to be split between a more action-focused section where you are in your dreams, basically, and you're fighting manifestations of your nightmares and your negative emotions, and then outside of that, in the waking world, if you like, it seems to be much more of an RPG, and you're engaging in dialogue with other characters and whatever, and it seems to be that is the part of the game that allows you to upgrade yourself in the combat sections, which is quite interesting. It's an interesting concept. I must admit, initially when I saw this game, I was kind of like, oh, it's another roguelike, and I hear roguelike and I'm just immediately turned off, but in actual fact, I think that might look quite good as well. I think that's definitely something to keep your eye on. And finally was Blasphemous, The Start of Dawn. This was DLC for the original Blasphemous game, which came out last year. This by Studio The Game Kitchen. For those of you that don't know, Blasphemous was a Metroidvania game that I actually am quite interested in indeed. Yeah. And you're interested in as well, which is interesting because I wasn't sure that this was going to be for you.
No, I wasn't sure either, but something about that trailer for the DLC just made me want to go and check out the original game. I spent a bit of time last night just looking up how long it was and how difficult it was and that kind of thing, because I think I've associated Blasphemous too much with the Souls games in my head and thinking it's that difficult, and I think it just wants to ape that kind of stylistically but isn't as tough.
I think that it's much more in the realm of Hollow Knight than it is in the realm of Dark Souls in terms of difficulty. You know what I mean? Exactly, it isn't like crushingly difficult, although still being difficult within itself. It's probably not that long but relatively difficult, I would say. I watched a lot of Twitch streams of it actually last year, and I actually thought it looked really good. Honestly, the DLC looks like more Blasphemous, and that is no bad thing. Alright then, news item number 3. Xbox has announced that xCloud will now be part of the Xbox Games Pass from September at no additional cost. Now, I actually think that this is a pretty big deal for the streaming future, Lewis, because this is now a subscription-based model which gives you access to a huge library of games at no additional cost. So this effectively is the fabled Netflix model of video games. I have 2 questions for you. One, it does seem as if the best deal in video games has just got even better again. And 2, I'm pretty sure now that this will render Google Stadia redundant in September.
Is Google Stadia not already redundant, Mike? No, that's
very rude.
That is rude. I'll take that back. But yeah, I basically agree with both of your points there. Like, so for anyone who doesn't know, like, this means that Xbox Game Pass, this incredible library of games, first parties and third parties and indies and everything, will be available to stream onto pretty much any device when these two things come together, and that is amazing and
incredible.
Like
absolutely
you said,
incredible.
It's as close to this, as you said, like fabled Netflix of gaming as we've ever come, and certainly if it remains as stable as Game Pass currently is, then it absolutely is that. So it is a big thing.
It is a big thing because for me, when we were talking about the streaming future before Google Stadia got involved and ruined everyone's perception of it, this is what we were talking about. This is exactly what we were talking about. This, to me, is sort of the dawn of the future of video games. It will take a long, long time for it to be implemented in the mainstream, and I think there's a long way to go with this stuff. But honestly, I still genuinely believe that what Xbox have done here is start the future. And if xCloud works as well as Google Stadia even, which in the tail intents and purposes, and I know that we're having a bit of a go at it here, but the technology basically works, do you know what I mean? That's that is no longer the problem with Google Stadia. Yeah. The problem is the lack of games. Whereas Xbox have come along and dropped a library of games in their streaming service that Google simply cannot even fathom competing with at this point. And yeah, absolutely incredible move by Xbox, and exactly what they should have been doing as well. It's nice to see them take that leap, definitely. However, Lewis, also this week, Phil Spencer has come out and squashed any suggestion that we might be getting Games Pass on any other device other than an Xbox and a PC, I guess, anytime soon. And this from an interview with German site GameStar. Now, you might be thinking, that was a bit daft. Why would the Xbox Games Pass be coming to other devices that aren't an Xbox? But Phil Spencer actually said last year on multiple occasions that his, quotes, long-term goal was to get Games Pass on, quotes, all platforms. So it wasn't as far-fetched a thought as you might think, considering the head of Xbox is saying it. This was particularly around the time as well, you have to remember, where Xbox had started publishing Ori and Cuphead, and specifically on Switch, and subsequently a whole other bunch of things, including Hellblade and whatever, have now come to Switch from Xbox. However, Spencer has made this statement to GameStar.
The thing about other gaming console platforms is we're not able to bring a full Xbox experience on those platforms. In places where we've brought Xbox, mobile phones like we're doing now with Project xCloud with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, and what we've done with PC bringing our full Xbox experience there, we know when somebody is playing one of our Xbox games, there's an expectation that they've got their Xbox Live community, they have their achievements, Game Pass is an option, my first party library is completely there. The other competitive platforms really aren't interested in having a full Xbox experience on their hardware. But for us, we want to be where gamers want to be, and that's the path that we're on.
So this is basically almost entirely a U-turn from what he was saying last year, isn't it? Let's be honest here. And it is basically as everyone suspected, in that this was never going to happen. I have no idea what expectation Xbox had that competitor hardware would be offering the quotes full Xbox experience. Because, to be honest with you, if Games Pass came over to PlayStation, say, in what would be a quite literal game-breaking
the sky is
situation,
falling.
the sky is falling situation, I wouldn't want all that stuff. I would just want all my PlayStation stuff and the X Pass running. So I'm not entirely sure the gamers actually do want the full Xbox experience. What they do want is to pay a subscription to Xbox and get an entire library of games for that subscription.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We don't necessarily want the full Xbox experience. Again, on my Switch, I don't want to have to boot up some Xbox emulator every single time I'm running an Xbox game. Again, if it had come to Switch, I would have just wanted access to those library of games that I could have maybe downloaded through the Nintendo store, similarly to PlayStation, and not have to go through Microsoft's ecosystem, basically. So I'm not entirely sure I would have wanted that, but at best, this message is exceptionally unclear and very wishy-washy statement there. And at worst, to be honest with you, this was a bit of a lie last year.
Or at least like something that they genuinely were interested in doing that has subsequently become extremely apparent that they weren't going to get away with it.
Yes, obviously. Because obviously anyone could have saw that, though.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it would be a good promotional tool for Xbox to
It'd be massive.
to put a stripped back version onto other platforms, because then if you are there and you're playing Halo on Nintendo Switch or on your PS4, and if you're playing that and it's not popping up with those achievements, and you start to think, if you're the kind of gamer who cares about that stuff, which I think neither of us really are, but
not particularly,
if you are that kind of gamer and you're not getting those achievements pop up, you might then be like, I think I might actually just buy an Xbox because it matters to me that I have all that other stuff. And then you might go out and buy their console. But to have not realised that was never going to be possible is just kind of absurd.
Yeah, it was a bit of a bizarre one, to be honest with you. However, the xCloud stuff and the coming together with Games Pass, that is a very, very big deal indeed. And it deserves to be treated as such, quite frankly. I think more people should be talking about how big a deal that is. All right, and news item number 4, and sticking with Xbox's mixed messaging list. This week it has been announced that the Xbox Live Gold 12-month subscription option has been removed from the Microsoft Store without any explanation or notice whatsoever. An Xbox spokesperson has said this statement to True Achievements.
At this time, Xbox has decided to remove the 12 months Xbox Live Gold SKU from the Microsoft Online Store. Customers can still sign up for a 1-month or 3-month Xbox Live Gold subscription online through the Microsoft Store.
Which is a statement that basically says, yes, this thing happened. We have acknowledged that this thing happened. It wasn't a mistake. Also, this week, it has been announced that the production of the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S All Digital Edition has ended, somewhat unbelievably. And Xbox has released this statement regarding that.
At Xbox, we're making massive investments to forge the future of gaming, a future that puts the player at the centre of the Xbox experience. We continue to build great games for Xbox One. We continue to build out Game Pass, now with more than 10 million members across Xbox console and PC. We're previewing Project xCloud in 15 countries, so gamers can play games with their friends on any device. And we're working hard on the next generation of console gaming with Xbox Series X, the fastest, most powerful console we've ever built, which includes backward compatibility with thousands of Xbox games and all Xbox One accessories. As we ramp into the future with Xbox Series X, we're taking the natural step of stopping production on Xbox One X and Xbox One S All Digital Edition. Xbox One S will continue to be manufactured and sold globally. Gamers can check with their local retailers for more details on Xbox One hardware availability.
Now, sticking with the discontinuation of the One X and the All Digital Edition, they said that this is a natural progression, which is true, which again is true. However, It's a natural progression that has happened several years before many people would have probably expected it to, because the Xbox 360, the PS3, I think we're still in production like 3 years into the next generation. It was like a really, really long time when I looked it up. I think the PS3 was in production for like 10 years or something like that. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. And the PS2 before that was supported for God knows how long. Absolutely God knows how long. So although, yes, this is a natural progression, no, it is not natural for it to be happening now, when the next generation hasn't even happened yet, which seems very, very strange, because the messaging from Phil Spencer, again, has always been, we don't want to force you to upgrade unless you want to. We want to give the player options. We want to give the consumer options. We don't want to be forcing anyone to do anything. And then, with the other hand, they've cut all your options for the current generation down to one, which you might not want. And also very strange that the all-digital edition has been out only a little over a year, despite the fact that it's been selling well. Like, it's been selling as an Xbox console. And they've also taken away the current most powerful console, which I don't understand it, but you actually had a pretty good theory about this.
I think it more or less confirms Xbox's strategy coming up. I think it all but confirms that Lockhart is real, this well-rumoured, often discussed...
Yeah, it wasn't really in doubt, to be fair, was it?
Essentially, the One S version of the Series X, so that smaller, slightly less powerful version, because I think what they're doing is removing the complication of the Xbox One X, which felt like it was going to overlap with Lockhart. So they remove that from production. They give you just the least powerful version of the current Xbox One, which is the S. Also
the most popular version as well.
Yeah,
it is worth pointing
exactly.
out. And it's also worth pointing out as well that this also came along with a global price cut for the Xbox One S, which is a natural progression going into the next generation, and PS4 will definitely follow with that.
That's good to know as well, because I was worried that by cutting the production of those other things, that would increase scarcity and that might drive the price back up.
No. So it's totally the opposite, actually.
That's good. So I think there is a lot of natural progression in this, because obviously, despite everything that Phil Spencer has said, like we covered that extensively last week, they do want us to buy the new console. Of course they do. They wouldn't bother making it if they didn't want people to jump into that. So you can see why they're doing it. But you were saying, as recently as last week, in the last few weeks, that you would consider buying an Xbox, and maybe that would have been a current gen one to get Game Pass and play even Xbox Series X games, but on that. But would you do that on the One S? Would you not have preferred
actually,
to get
it was
the One X?
It was an all digital edition I was looking at, actually, because it was the cheapest one, and all I was going to get it for was Games Pass. Yeah. So it was the all digital edition I was looking at, but now I have to buy an S, I guess, if I'm going down that road, which I still might, to be honest with you, because if Xbox are, as they say, going to support the One for a couple of years into the next generation, then if I can get a One S for, I don't know, a couple of $100, and I can get a couple of years use out of it, like, that's worth it for me, like, hands down. Enough, I can get Games Pass and I can get all the games, all the third parties and whatever on that. I'd be quite happy with that, to be completely honest with you. But going on to the second part of this as well, I suppose, that the 12-month subscription has been cut. I don't really think that this is as big a deal as people were making it out to be on the internet, to be completely honest with you. I think that Xbox really want to consolidate their subscriptions down to one subscription, and that one subscription is going to be Games Pass. So I think moving into the next generation, they were going to change this anyway. So the fact that they are taking away that 12-month subscription, which we take it this time next year, obviously, means that would be a lot of overlap with the new console. So I sort of understand this, and it does look as if that they are consolidating now xCloud, the current Xbox Live, and Games Pass into one subscription, which, as far as I'm concerned, is exactly what they should be doing. So there was a lot of rubbish going about on the internet around this, quite frankly, but actually I think that is a perfectly reasonable move by Xbox.
It just neatens everything up for the gamer.
Absolutely, of course it does. But in terms of discontinuing the consoles, that is a weird choice to do that, considering what has happened in previous generations. Like, for example, I'm expecting the PS4 and the PS4 Pro to be readily available, new productions of that console to be readily available 2 years from now. Quite genuinely. Alright, finishing off, as we always do, with a couple of shout-outs. Shout out number 1, Insomniac, Lewis, have announced an optional performance mode for Spider-Man Miles Morales, which will allow you to swing through New York City at an absolutely glorious 4K 60 frames per second. My question is, why is that an option? Why is that not just the default?
The default? Well, who knows? I mean, there must be a hardware answer for that, right?
Well, Overcooked can do 4K 60 frames per second, so why the hell isn't that just standard? I don't understand why that was even an option. Like, Because, on God of War, of course, when you started that up, there was an option to boost performance or boost resolution, basically. And although the performance never got anywhere close to 60 frames per second, obviously, but I hope that it's not a situation like that, because I want both. I want a massive improvement in resolution. I want that 4K, and I want 60 frames per second running smoothly. That is exactly what I want. So I don't really understand why they've provided this as an option. I just want this to be the default. Like, I don't want the option to turn it off anything apart from that, to be completely honest. Alright, shout out number 2. Konami, Lewis, have announced that the new Pro Evolution Soccer 2021 will in actual fact be an update for the current PES 2020. But there will be a new Pro Evolution Soccer next year on the next generation consoles, so this will be Pro Evolution Soccer 2022. Yeah, that's right. Konami have made this statement regarding the PES series.
As the industry stands at the precipice of an exciting new generation of consoles, we believe that now is the perfect time to share some of our plans for the future of the PES franchise with you. To that end, we're excited to announce that we are hard at work on a next-generation football title that aims to truly embody our core concept of "the pitch is ours." This title is being developed with an updated engine that will enable us to dazzle you with staggering improvements to all areas of the game. Expect more realistic player models and animations, enhanced physics, photorealistic visuals, and much, much more. We recognise that many of you are enthusiastic for new My Club and Master League content, and we are also excited to share that large updates are in the works for both of these modes. However, the sheer scale of everything we are aiming to achieve for our next-gen debut has made it necessary to pare back our efforts in other areas of development. As a result, we've made the decision to launch this year's PES as a streamlined offering in the form of a season update. That being said, we're still extremely confident that this year's game offers fans more than enough thrills to tide them over until our next-gen title is ready for launch. This year also marks a quarter of a century since the very first PES title was released. To commemorate this important milestone, and more importantly to show our gratitude to you, our loyal fans, we are pleased to announce that this year's PES will launch at an affordable anniversary price and will also come with several bonuses. Currently, we aim to begin testing our next-gen title sometime in mid-2021 with an estimated release date later in the same year. Until that time, we hope to see you back on the pitch in this year's season update. Look forward to more news regarding our next-gen project closer to release.
So there's a bit of additional background to this that they're obviously not going into their statement here, but Konami are actually going to scrap Hideo Kojima's Fox engine, which PES were using since PES 2014. And I think the Fox engine is probably the best, least used game engine in gaming history. Yeah. It was an absolutely remarkable engine that can produce games like Metal Gear Solid 5, but Konami have only used it to make football games,
pretty much,
which is absolutely bizarre. However, they are scrapping that, and they will be moving to Unreal Engine 5 in the next generation, so that Pro Evolution Soccer 2022 will be on Unreal 5. However, this is the way I think sports games should be, and this is the way a lot of people think sports games should be, as just a seasonal update to a base game. Now, I understand that Konami will want to change their engine, so that maybe doesn't make sense for them to continue that at this very specific moment. However, it would be very interesting to see how fans respond to this, because if they get good fan response to this, and if that price that they were talking about isn't super expensive, isn't full price, and you are effectively getting a new game for that, I hope that other publishers, 2K and EA specifically, pick this up, and I hope that Konami continue to do it, to be completely honest with you, because that'd be really, really good, I think.
You're totally right. It makes perfect sense, but there's obviously a big loss of income potentially there. Thinking particularly about EA and FIFA, they release that annually. They don't have to change very much, and yet they make an absolute killing.
FIFA and EA make vastly more money on their microtransactions than they do selling bloody games.
Like,
so.
you would hope. I mean, we obviously are not mad keen on microtransactions, but you would hope that they would now start to take that into account. That if that's the money generator, then you probably still need to release a new game every 2 or 3 years, because there'll be more substantial tech updates and stuff that you could do. But yeah, like to update squads and kits and Stadia and that kind of stuff for a lot of sports franchises, that'll be fine for like a year or two.
Absolutely. Alright, shout out number 3. After many years, Lewis, many years of review bombing, Metacritic has decided to do something about it effectively, and they have implemented a 36-hour waiting period between the release of new games and the time that users can actually submit reviews. So the most recent casualty of this, of course, was The Last of Us Part 2 that got horrifically review bombed. And also this will ensure that a larger proportion of the users reviewing the game will have actually played the game, do you know what I mean, and aren't bombing it for some political reason or whatever dumb reason that they have to do. It remains to be seen how effective this is going to be, but the user review scores of Ghost of Tsushima are sitting at 9.2 right now, which is staggeringly high for Metacritic for a big AAA game.
That's pretty much
particularly
the first game
an
that
exclusive
had it.
as well, particularly
exactly.
an exclusive. So early indications are good, and I think that is a great thing, because I heard that off the back of the Nintendo Direct as well, that the Shin Megami Tensei series had been review bombed as well on
Crazy.
Metacritic, which is just
Who has the time for that?
I don't know. I don't know who has the time for that. I certainly fucking don't. I can tell you that. All right, and shout out number 4. Jason Schreier has written a piece over at Bloomberg titled "Ubisoft Family Accused of Mishandling Sexual Misconduct Claims." Now, this is actually a fantastic article, and I'd very, very much encourage everyone to go and read it. But obviously, this has a lot to do with the sexual assault allegations that have been levelled at a lot of Ubisoft employees, and specifically the fact that the Guillemot family were aware of this situation and done nothing a long time before these allegations actually became public. And something else that came out of this article is that the main character from the Assassin's Creed Odyssey series was supposed to be only Cassandra, and Alexios was only added later on, apparently because Chief Creative Officer Serge Haskell at the time said that women don't sell, which is of course absolute fucking bollocks, as has been proven by Tomb Raider, Metroid, Perfect Dark, the Resident Evil series for a lot of it, Half-Life Alyx, The Last of Us, Telltale's The Walking Dead, Bayonetta, Nier Automata. I mean, the list goes on. Do you know what I mean? Horizon, Hellblade, fucking back to Miss Pac-Man, we knew that this was bollocks. It's almost as if, Lewis, that the quality of the game is actually vastly more important whether or not a man is on the fucking cover of it or not.
And just don't listen so much to YouTube comments from 14-year-old boys who are still going to play the game anyway, and listen instead to the sales figures of all those franchises you just mentioned. You know, it's the fact they had to change the plot and the characters in Syndicate and in Origins as well that came out from that, which is just insane. That's
absolutely
3
nonsense.
major games in that franchise
Absolutely
that we
nonsense.
know of that have had to change because of
And
this.
to be honest with you, this speaks massively towards Ubisoft's attitude for years, taking absolutely no fucking risks and playing everything as safe as possible, keeping everything nice and straight down the line, not politically on the left and not politically on the right, just perfectly down the middle. And maybe if they had taken the odd risk here and there, me and Lewis might have played one of their games this generation, because we were just talking about the fact the other day that me and you have played no Ubisoft games between us. I had played The Stick of Truth this generation, which was a South Park game and was actually from the previous generation, I believe.
Yeah, and I've played none as far as I've played half an hour of Far Cry 4 and I think that's about it.
And as well, like, we wonder why the video games industry has like such a bad reputation for like toxic masculinity and gender inequality and inequality in general. And when you've got people like this fucking running the show, it's ridiculous. And people look for hard examples of systemic issues and systemic bigotry, and lies like that being perpetuated by someone that high at that influential publisher is a fucking screaming example of it. Fucking dumb. Anyway, Lewis, I think it's time for a beer, and then we will be back with Topic of the Week.
Nice.
And we are back with Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is: since the cancellation of E3, Lewis, how do we feel that all the replacement online showcases have gone? Obviously, this ties a little bit into the Nintendo Direct and a little bit into the Day of the Devs, but there have been loads of games showcases recently. So again, we're not talking about specific games showcases, we're more talking about how we feel this model of online showcases has gone for the industry and how it's gone for gamers as well, I suppose. So my stance on this, and when E3 was cancelled, and as well we already knew, of course, at that point that E3 was kind of in a bit of an identity crisis as well. But my thoughts were, these online showcases are effectively going to kill E3. That was the mindset that I had. Publishers are going to realise that they do not need E3 to get their message across to their fans. All of these showcases are going to be like great, super cool, super sleek Nintendo Directs. The good ones, not that many. And this would be the final nail in the coffin for E3. However, I think that my stance has actually changed quite a bit since then, if I'm totally honest with you. Because things now seem incredibly diffuse, because everyone has a showcase. Like, everyone has a showcase. And it's very, very tough to keep track of it. And I like to think that me and you are plugged in to the video games industry. And maybe a lot of the people listening to this podcast are also really plugged into the video games industry. But for your average gamer, to keep up with the torrent of information that's coming at you, must be very, very difficult. And as well, a lot of them won't appeal to a lot of gamers as well. There might be one announcement per showcase. And I was doing a very, very rough count, like a very, very rough count of this. So don't pull me up if you think there's more or less. But a very rough count of how many kind of semi-major showcases there've been, like, so up to your PlayStations and whatever, and right down to like your Guerrilla Collectives and indie showcases and things like that. And I counted 25 games showcases, Lewis. An absolutely colossal amount. And honestly, watching that Day of the Devs showcase, and this was partly why at first watch I was maybe responding a wee bit negatively to some of the games, because, mate, I've got showcase fatigue. Yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. I have showcase fatigue and I've got it bad. I don't want to see another showcase, which isn't great considering Xbox's is on Thursday. But man, I really do. It's just been so much information.
Honestly, I've got to agree with most of what you're saying there, Mark. Originally, I thought much the same, that the cancellation of E3, I wasn't sure it would necessarily be the final death knell, but certainly that idea that E3 was going through an identity crisis, coupled with everything else that's going on and all the changes that were wrought just by COVID this year, kind of thing.
Yeah,
like, it was going
of course,
to have
this has been done out of necessity as well, and all these developers are doing the right thing. None of them are trying to get people into conference centres and whatever, and all that is very admirable and exactly what they should be doing. I'm not putting any of that on the developers, absolutely, or the publishers themselves.
And I think also this more diffuse model, had it happened in an otherwise standard year, so if there was no E3 but everyone was still doing traditional, live conferences where they could have people in the room but all broadcast on their own channels or on YouTube or whatever, so that the world can kind of see them doing that at different times, that might have been different. It might have been better, particularly if the games themselves hadn't been compromised. The development of certain titles for certain companies is simply going to have been affected. And I think, not to delve into any of the showcases too much, but most of them, particularly the bigger ones, thinking specifically right now about EA and thinking about that Ubisoft Forward, they were lacking surprises. There was kind of nothing of newsworthy quality a lot of the time. So there's that part of it that I think, as a general thing, I think we have to go, this is not a great year, full stop.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is a very unique situation that we're all in here.
But I would agree, like, the scale of these, the amount and the diffusion of them across the summer has meant that it is near impossible, even for people like us, I think, to keep up totally with them. There are still showcases, particularly right at the start, that you watch a bit of, and then you're like, IGN's got its thing tomorrow as well, and I've got to watch that. And so often,
I mean, that Day of the Devs and the Nintendo Mini happened on the same day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I think there's just a lot of games that will have been lost in the mix there, or conversely, that will have appeared in multiple places. For instance, like Ghost Runner, that was on Day of the Devs, that has been shown elsewhere. But you watch it on this show and you think, oh, that's great. And you're like, well, actually, there's a bunch of other videos about it. So for anyone to kind of follow the narrative, the marketing narrative of these games, becomes really difficult. And for indies particularly, that's a problem.
Well, another thing that was brought up when all this was happening and all these showcases started to kick off was, this is going to get loads more games in front of loads more eyes, particularly with an eye to indies, I think. But honestly, I can't help but think that maybe a lot of indies have actually got lost in the wash here. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think exactly that, because there's just been such a huge deluge of stuff, and the bigger studios aren't really showing off a lot of indie stuff, really, or a lot of smaller projects. So a lot of these indie titles have had to come out in things like the IGN Summer of Gaming events or Keighley Summer Game Fest. And
so it's like the Day of the Devs or the Guerrilla Collective, which are indie-specific showcases, which I feel that is a particular crowd that is watching that anyway, that probably would have been clued up anyway. Do you know what I mean? So then, therefore, getting your game in front of more eyes, I'm not really sure how much that is happening in reality, as much as it was spoken about when these showcases were kicking off.
Exactly that, yeah. Some of those things, to me, I think should have come together. I think that is essentially the answer to it for me. What has happened is that everything is scattered right across June and July so far. It's
well into August as well.
Exactly.
Well into August. We've not even got to Gamescom.
Exactly. So opening night live at Gamescom is going to be, as Keighley said, like his big finale piece for Summer Game Fest. Like, who knows if other studios will still be doing... I mean, Xbox said that they were going to do something
PlayStation was supposed to be doing something in August as well.
And so there's still more of this to come. And the bigger publishers and particularly the platform holders, they can get away with this, right? PlayStation can kind of do as much as they want, and Xbox can kind of do as much as they want, and people will pay attention to it. But for a lot of that smaller stuff, I really do think that keeping those things within a few weeks of each other can, like the Guerrilla Collective and Day of the Devs, like maybe they should have come together. What Guerrilla Collective did that I think was a misstep was that they did multiple days and they interspersed announcements and trailers.
Yeah, I have to admit that was a problem with IGN.
Yeah, with like gameplay deep dives and stuff, and it became really difficult because you're like, I just want to kind of quickly see all this. Then I'll go and find what else. If there's a game that I see here and I think that looks great, I'll go and dive into that and I'll find the deeper content about it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have to sit through 45 minutes of someone playing a game that I'm not interested in just to see the next trailer, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely no. I completely agree about that. Although we are quite happy, I think, to digest these things online, I think that you still need that showcase. Like, you still need the proper showcase. I feel that a lot of people are taking a very casual approach to these things, whereas in actual fact, I think that the production value of the live showcases, that your EAs, your Gamescoms, your GDCs, whatever it happens to be, really lended a lot to what made those showcases great. And the reality is right now is that we have to be sitting in rooms far apart from one another, and quite often you're looking at someone down a webcam that may or may not be great, listening to them on sound from either a headset or a microphone that may or may not be great. And even the Xbox presentation of the third-party games took this kind of approach, whereas I think that the Nintendo Direct approach, which was what my visualization of this, which was studio-produced or extremely high production quality, even the Devolver Digital production as well was very highly produced and had a bit of spectacle to it. And the PlayStation reveal event, again, they were all shot in a studio. I very much hope as well, all taken care of with in terms of social distancing and all being very safe. But there was a huge amount of production value there. Like, even in the PlayStation one, like the kind of go between section graphics and stuff like that.
They'd really thought
absolutely
about
amazing.
it. Yeah.
Whereas Xbox's was this very casual approach to everything, which I think if you're trying to wow people with new games and next generation, like, I don't know, you could use a bit of pizzazz, for lack of a better term, do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of that really is lost. And I really think that the casual nature and the lack of production in some of the showcases, I mean, even thinking about Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest, he uses like a sound gate or something like that, and his sound is weird, and I don't like it. And I don't like the fact that, I don't know, sometimes I feel like you could be doing different cuts. That isn't a dig at Jeff Keighley. Like, it's just a general thing about some people talking on camera, because sometimes you don't get it right first time. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I just feel as if some of that is lost. It's too casual. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to say that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but I think, again, if you're trying to wow someone with new games and new consoles specifically this year, then you could really use some of that extra lift, like to lift these announcements, which could otherwise like fall a wee bit flat. Like, I think that at some points, even in the PlayStation reveal, like, I think that there were points that people could have been going, oh, right, well, I'm not really interested in this game.
Absolutely,
not really interested in that. But then kind of hard cut to like cool, freaky graphic. Listen to someone talk for a very short period of time, which again is crucial, because again, I think there was a lot of the IGN stuff was guilty of this, and that I had a lot of people talking for quite a long period of time, and it was just a bit like, just hit the notes, you know what I mean? It's not the same as listening to someone on stage. It's not the same as listening to someone address a room. It's a webcam conversation. It's a Skype conversation, effectively. It's not the same dynamic, so you can't expect the same content to come out as well.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean?
And particularly, I think as well, when you introduce the idea that for most of us, our day-to-day lives during all of this has been to sit and watch people on fucking webcams talking
so
casually.
many Zoom calls.
Exactly. I'm almost reluctant to make that point, but there is something there about when Phil Spencer turned up in the Devolver Digital showcase, and he was just sat in front of a laptop clearly.
But so did Shuhei Yoshida. That's not against him. So did Jeff Keighley.
Exactly. Like, and Jeff Keighley's kind of, I don't want to say the worst for it exactly, but like everything he's done is like sat in the same spot, in front of the same computer, probably presenting in exactly the same way, and it feels a lot like what your work meetings feel like, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
And so
I think that there could have been a lot more done had people been given access to other people more than anything, and hadn't had to. And I completely understand that the nature of why a lot of people are using webcams is a completely valid one, and is absolutely what they should be doing.
Absolutely.
I mean, unless you can produce something like PlayStation or Devolver can in a studio safely, then this is 100% what you're doing. Again, I'm not actually having a go at anyone specifically for this. I'm just saying that in comparison to that live show, the excitement, the energy that comes along with that, a lot of that is to do with the production value of what you're actually watching. And when a lot of that is stripped away, I don't know, I anyway find it difficult to be as excited about things that even I'm excited about. You know what I mean? As much as I loved the PlayStation 5 review, I would have still loved to have seen that delivered to an auditorium full of mad PlayStation fans. Do you know what I mean?
To get the crowd noise.
The energy there would have been incredible. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure exactly the same thing where Xbox for Xbox fans, it would have been exactly the same thing, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's definitely issues with how it's gone this year, but I still think the idea of doing it this way has legs. You've also got to imagine how many of these things were pulled together so quickly. I keep coming back to the fact
of course, that is again a huge point in this as well, is that a lot of these things were pulled together at the last minute as well,
and it's like, you know, for instance, like Crash, the new Crash game being shown off in its own little slot on Summer Game Fest. In one sense, and Tony Hawk as well was done in that way. Like, in one sense, that's great. That game gets a little bit of focus. They pre-announced what it was going to be, so if you're a particular fan of those franchises, you make sure you're there and you watch that stream. However, had there been more time to consider how best to present those things, maybe certain games would have been brought together and turned into more of a package, and you would have had more of a like 45 minutes of trailers back to back and hype, whereas the whole thing, the whole summer, and that's again not having a go at the Keighley Summer of...
Not having a go at anyone, because
not exactly,
this is completely done out of necessity. Completely done out of necessity.
But there's something there about just bringing it all tighter together, like maybe containing it all within June, maybe making sure that each major publisher has a show once a week through that time, and the smaller ones or the indies go at the weekends in between.
I think that implies a level of coordination among the publishers that simply does not exist.
But where does that exist? That exists with E3. And
exactly.
So if the ESA can get its shit in order, work out what the hell its function is anymore, I think they could still do that. You could have a world where these things are still delivered digitally, coordinated by the ESA, while they still hold a physical in-person event for fans to come together and play some of this stuff. But the big showcases, to save the energy and the money and all the rest of it for the big publishers, they can just kind of do it their own way, like they've been doing this year, but with a bit more sort of gravitas.
Structure around the announcements. I must admit, I never really thought about that, but that is a very good thought. I thought that E3 was going to be dead after this. That was kind of what I was thinking, although that sounds a bit more dramatic than actually meant it. But I kind of thought that the need for that will be gone. But in actual fact, I think that due to E3 not being there, is almost shown its function, and its function is almost, as you said, that organisation and getting people in a physical room to be excited about something, where these publishers have thrown, I'm sure, hundreds of millions of dollars into putting an amazing presentation together to excite fans. Whether that's done as a Nintendo Direct style thing, as you said, or whether it's done live, I think that the ESA and E3 might actually still have a place. Like, I now would be sad if that structure went, because having all that in an absolute smash 1 week, more information than you can handle, do you know what I mean? Whereas as opposed to this long drawn out horror show of marketing that you just cannot keep up with. No one can keep up with it. It's impossible. It's just too much. So I almost think that due to their absence, they've proven their own worth somehow, completely accidentally, not by the ESA's design. But I think that there is actually a place for physical conferences. And I think that probably does come with the logistics of organising the publishers to release stuff on a schedule that is nice for consumers.
Exactly, yeah. And if they learn stuff from the way other things have been done, and they take the way that Keighley set up a calendar and stuff like that, so that we can all follow that stuff, even if it's in a more diffuse manner, I think they'll nail it. I never
understood why E3 never had a calendar.
Yeah,
that was
exactly,
bizarre.
Yeah. There's a future there, I think.
All of this has actually made me feel better about having an E3 in 2021 or maybe 2022 or whenever they get back around to having another one, and the Gamescom, and it's made me feel a lot better about them now than I did going into this, because I honestly thought E3 might never come back, but in actual fact I do still think that it holds a place for gamers. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. Again, I know I say it every single week, but it does not get less important on a weekly basis. It really doesn't. And if you have given us a review, thank you so much. It really, really does help us out so much. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Bastion, as we have already mentioned. I have already completed it. I think that this might be the first play-along game that I have completed more than the week before we were supposed to be doing it. I'm incredibly organised. But you won't have to fit it into Ghost of Tsushima time.
Yeah, I'm going to find a balance between those two. We've still got a couple of weeks, so I'll
definitely. I can confirm that it's around about 8 hours. Again, it is going for an absolutely cracking price on Steam. I think it was under £3, so no excuse whatsoever not to play along with us, and there's plenty of time to do so. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.